Afternoon, everybody. Nice to be here. I've got to follow Claire's sparkling presentation for one of my own, and thanks to Beth Loudon for letting me hop in front of her. I thought this would be a slightly less intimidating venue than it actually is. I'll just have to pretend that all my mates already, and hopefully by the end of this presentation will know me well. I seem to have overshared in the biography, especially with the last paragraph. But if you get bored, I can always read you a children's story. So, who am I, what do I do, who do I work for? Well, strange beast this, I heard Margaret Hodge saying people don't stick around long enough in the public sector to do things these days, and sadly I've been in local government most of my professional career, so sadly I love it. I love local government, I love the public sector. I seem to have been with 4Ps, stroke local partnerships, a very long time now. Most of my experience is in the public sector, but I have worked for private sector oversheds and other bodies in my career. Over that period of time, you do see the same sort of things coming back. And as it might be a bit of a theme I get into as, in the 30 minutes or so I've got to speak to you before your tea break. So I am seeing now a lot of things that came along when I was a trainee lawyer coming back again. So, for example, using social policy in procurement, trying to use your buying purchasing power to achieve other ends other than lowest price, and exploring the boundaries of that. For example, promoting jobs, promoting regeneration, and other lots of very interesting things that public authorities are doing. Before I get into the talk, who are local partnerships? That's the organisation I'm now employed by. Local partnerships subsumes, shall we say, PUK and 4Ps, and became this new organisation, and then found itself owned by the Treasury, 50%, and I still have to pinch myself, I'll say that, I'm not going to say anything else about central government, will I ever? So we are owned by central government, 50%, and by the local government association, 50%. So a joint venture at the top level in the public sector. And although my talk is perhaps not snappily entitled Supporting Local Authorities in Public Procurement, having seen now the invitation list and the people here, I realise I'm speaking to a much wider audience than local government, so I'll try and tailor my remarks appropriately. Procurement, of course, crosses the piece. And a lot of what I do at local partnerships has a kind of all-encompassing approach, and it should be of interest to all of you, so hopefully it's not just going to be about local government. But the job that local partnerships plays is it kind of exists in that netherworld between central government, local government, and the operation of policy. And where we try and influence and play a role is to try and help local public bodies, as we like to call them, but also local authorities, with the implementation of that policy in a way which is going to be attractive to the market and the private sector. So often the job I'm called upon to do is to explain to local authorities and other public bodies how their proposals and their schemes and their contracts and their approach to the market might seem to the big wide world out there, and how sometimes local authorities and other public bodies can get a bit above themselves. They can think we've got this big opportunity and everybody should come and get it. And actually it's playing back to them that the world is actually a very large place, and their bit of it might be actually a relatively small part of that very big place, and that bidders and other people in the commercial world actually assess public bodies on their ability to deliver these schemes and deliver these procurements. And sometimes that comes as a little wake-up exercise, but sometimes as well we have authorities that are already very clear and understand that process. But with 400 authorities, there's a kind of a lot of difference between them, should we say. So, local partnerships, as I say, exist in that kind of grey world between central, local, and local government, and we exist to assist those bodies to deliver more effectively and efficiently. And a lot of what I do is generating know-how, developing guidance, but also working with local authorities on projects to actually learn the lessons. A lot of my career has been involved in a major procurement environment. So a lot of what I've done until relatively recently, it's interesting because we're changing all this issue about, are we going to carry on doing the same old thing? One of my themes is that actually everything's changing. And is it for the better? Is it going to be a brave new world with the changes to the procurement rules being posed, or is it going to be more confusing? I think it's going to be a bit of a mixture of that, so not very helpful to you there. Anyway, just to run quickly down what we do, promote information across local authorities. The national network, which Claire mentioned, both Claire and Barry are on that national network, so you can see the calibre of people we've got at the centre working with procurement issues and trying to sing with a single voice, if you like, on procurement issues generally. And that's a real innovative approach there. One of the things I still do is develop major contracts templates for PFI, and one of my jobs is to update those templates and contracts. And that still goes on, because there is still a rump of PFI still going on out there. And one of the new challenges to local partnerships is to help local authorities and other public bodies. There's some 500 or so PFI operational schemes out there. And interestingly, you probably won't be surprised to learn that one of our major remits is now to help local authorities with the contract management of those major projects and to drive out value for money and to get that real coordination and nexus between the private sector deliverers and the public sector procurers. So we've got a major work stream working towards that at the moment. I don't need to dwell on any more of that. Reform of EU law, I thought we might be interested in this. One of the things that the LGA, one of our parents at the Local Partnerships Enterprise, is leading on and we are contributing to, is the current review of the procurement law. I don't know how much of this you've had this morning already, so I'll try and be brief, but I'm sure most of you in this room will be aware that there is a major exercise going on, consultative exercise, looking to procure the changes to our wonderful, fantastic EU procurement laws, to see if they can be in any way simplified, to see if they can help public bodies to procure more swiftly, effectively and efficiently. And I'm sure there's lots of people involved in this process and putting their two pence into the centre, wherever the centre may be. Because in this world we are obviously in Europe, 28 member states, the centre is in itself a very big place. So the Local Government Association and local partnerships and through the national network, we're all trying to influence that process to hopefully come up with something a bit better than we may have at the moment. Whether we succeed or not, let's see. But we are at least in the game of trying to influence those discussions and trying to bring our practical experience of procurement, not just from a public sector point of view, but also importantly from the private sector, to along with that reflection and experience back up the chain of command, if you like to put it that way, to try and influence this really important process that's going on. Now, my latest information is that the way these things go is depending on the negotiations between the Member States and the European Parliament, the new directive could be agreed at some point in 2013. If anyone else in the room has got any more information, then do let me know now or later. But then with probably an 18-month period to transpose those directives into regulations in the UK. So we've got a fair amount of time to explore these new changes and what they might mean. I'm not going to go through them all in detail, but I have given you some website references to have a look at if that's your bag. I just thought I'd pull out a couple of the key areas that the LGA are focusing on. One is to ensure what they call an effective review of financial thresholds, and I think that means to review those thresholds upwards for 2017. And a light touch approach from the existing changes. So there is a proposal to remove the distinction between Part A and Part B services. And now I realise I'm speaking to a mixed audience of private sector and public sector, and those of you in the private sector are really looking forward to getting your hands on competition on a widespread basis for any of these things, then certainly the LGA's view, and I think a lot of people in public sector's view, is there isn't really a need to change those Part A and Part B services. And if you think about legal services in England, are we really going to have French firm delivering legal services in England? I don't know. Possibly it's more an issue than not. One of the things that rocks my boat is the interesting discussions we have about inter-authority cooperation and collaboration. The tech-out exemption. Hands up those who have heard of the tech-out exemption. Yeah, there's a good few in the building as well. I won't bother to explain all that, but you know what I mean. There's where one public body and another public body want to do something very sensible, maybe join up for the better performance of public administration. Can they do so without sticking out an OG notice and saying, would you like to come and join with me, and get loads of responses back from the market? And this issue has become very interesting for lawyers. You know, we have the Brent case in the Supreme Court, which is absolutely excellent, I would say, from my perspective. And we've got a bit more clarity around that, and even more clarity may come from actually harmonising that case law into codified EU legislation. and saying when it is and when it isn't appropriate for the public sector to join up and do things together. And a lot of that case law, as I say, is being codified. The problem with all of this is once you codify it, then it becomes entrenched. And we want to make sure that the right things are codified. So again, you have an example there of something which we're trying to influence. At the moment, it's a very de minimis bit of trading that can be done on such takeout type entities, and we're seeking to influence that approach to make it a bit more. Now, another thing that is close to my heart is the competitive dialogue process. I'm sure it's close to your heart. I'm sure you've grown to know and love the competitive dialogue process over the last 6 years since it's been introduced. See some frowns and some smiles there. And competitive dialogue, I feel, I'd like to feel, it was a step forward in as much as it allowed face-to-face discussion between public bodies and the market. The downside of that is a badly handled competitive dialogue process could take any and could cost a packet. And lots of our friends in the private sector were saying this is a very expensive process and we would rather like to see something else. Well, I guess good news and bad news. On the good news side, there is something else being trailblazed at the centre, if you can ever use that term in the EU procurement process in the same breath. But there is a new procedure being mooted, negotiated process, and I, at the moment, can't for the life of me see much difference between the new process and the existing process. So, some good news and some bad news. If you know any more detail, then I'm more than happy to talk to you. As I said when I started this, the issue about green and social procurement now being encouraged at the centre, from central government to through central government procurement and through local government procurement and through other procurement like public bodies. This seems to be a really big policy push from the Conservative Liberal coalition government to try and make procurement and the buying and purchasing power central to encouraging growth and regeneration, and the way in which local authorities and other public bodies use their spending power to try and make as much influence as possible. And it's interesting because in my experience I've seen that come full circle between being completely, almost completely prohibited, although some authorities did try and do it on the corner by having codes of practice and things like that, which is still there. But now it's become much more mainstream, much more smiled upon, and indeed in the EU are encouraging it as a way of encouraging economic development and getting more small and medium-sized enterprises involved in procurement. These are the two websites I've mentioned. These will explain in more detail both the LGA, stroke local partnerships, and CEMA. CEMA is the kind of European, if I can explain, like European LGA really. It's all the local authorities in Europe through their kind of central body. So close cooperation and note there between the UK LGA and its counterparts, if you like, across Europe on some of these key issues that we examine. And then the Cabinet Office procurement policy note has just come out, which gives you a handy snapshot of the discussion so far. So, I won't bore you anymore, but have a look at those with actual bang. I've got 10 minutes, is that right? I've got your watch, so you can't stop me, can you? So,
I've got another one, don't worry.
You got another one, right? Procurement as a means of promoting yourself, been through that. Major procurement and competitive dialogue process. I think people are woken up to the fact that, interestingly, the UK and I think about 3 other countries are using competitive dialogue in aggregate. So there's 28 member states out there, which means 24 of them are not going on any competitive dialogue and haven't done it for 6 years. Which is interesting when we were all told that this was the way to do major procurement and that there wasn't any other way of doing it effectively. So something has happened, and I don't know what it is, but something happened up high that said we had to do it this way. And I like to think that we were getting to a situation where competitive dialogue was becoming mainstream and was being used efficiently, at least in a number of public bodies, but there was always a way to go. What I'm a bit afraid of now is that at the very time when we need to stimulate growth, stimulate infrastructure, we need to have clear direction on processes, and the market needs to understand what there are. We've got a bit of change and turn going on. We've got new processes being introduced which might confuse, at least in the short term, something which I think was beginning to turn a corner, but we are where we are. Another thing that's hit my desk recently is not the same organisation that talking about the financial issues on evaluation, but another organisation sounds very similar, National Property Federation, I think we've got that right, or no, the British Federation of Property. Anyway, one of those big organisations that acts in the centre for major developers. I've been bending my ear, and also individual developers have as well, so it's not a single issue. But they've all been saying to me, look, we're really concerned that local authorities and public bodies these days are becoming too entrenched in procurement issues, and they see land development deals now as brought within the procurement sphere. And as far as we're concerned, it's never been part of procurement. We've been chosen before on a different basis, and if we see an ONG notice inviting us to go enter into a 9-month, 18-month procurement process just to do some development work, then it's not exactly attractive. So those are the messages that are coming back, and they're asking me whether we can develop some guidance that would encourage public bodies to look at those sorts of deals. We're talking Section 106 agreements, talking land development transactions, where there's a need to get a developer in to do something, and there is a fog, or there has been a fog around that because of certain ECJ case law. Rowan, anyone heard of Rowan? A few nods, please. Yeah. Okay, we haven't heard of it now, and there's some sticky stuff around that as to whether you need to go out to procure it. And it all depends on whether the procurer is asking for requirements and it becomes a service contract, or it's being where the balance of risk is in those exercises. So there's no doubt that it has become enmeshed and entrenched, if you like, in the wider procurement environment. The question is, can it be unpicked? And can some guidance be provided, or some help be provided to try and separate out procurement issues from traditional land development schemes, so that we can get these projects up and running that much more quickly and easily and efficiently. And some authorities are exploring the boundaries of that. Oxford and its land of Barton is a scheme that I was close to and have seen, and I'm interested in their approach. I haven't got much time, I'm afraid, so that's me. I hope that was of interest. I hope it wasn't just of interest to those in local authorities, but of wider interest. Happy to take any questions. Yeah? Yeah. And I haven't stopped you from the coffee either, we've still got 5 minutes. So. Any questions? Do you want me to read a children's story? I can do that.
About the SAS one.
The SAS one.
Yeah. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you've got nothing for Rob.
Okay.